Welcome, everybody. We'll give just a couple of minutes for folks to get in, and then we'll get started. All right, I know we've got quite a bit to cover, so I think we'll just jump in. Hello, my name is Luke Tolley, and I'm the Executive Director of Solar Washington, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar, whether you're watching live right now or a little bit later on our recording. We are really excited to hear from our presenters today from Lawyers for Good Government about the implementation of solar elective pay and the new legislative landscape we are all navigating. Solar Washington is an independent, education-based nonprofit organization for anyone interested in solar. Our work, though we are independent, is only possible because of the support of our sponsors and members, and we are grateful for their support. We would like to invite you after this webinar to get involved and to support our vision of 100% clean energy for the state of Washington. You can do that by joining as a member or a sponsor, donating to our work, and attending our 2025 Solar Summit on October 24th at South Seattle College. All that information can be found on our website, www.solarwa.org. And now I get to hand things off to Edward Yim with Lawyers for Good Government to continue introducing his team and to jump into our presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Luke. I really want to thank Luke and Solar Washington for inviting us to have this really important and timely conversation about solar tax credits and the new federal landscape that the recently passed legislation have created for us. We have really a talented group of colleagues that are with me that are going to discuss in greater detail what all those things are and what they mean, what they could potentially mean for you and your solar projects, and what types of assistance and service we may be able to provide for you to help you deploy your solar projects. So we'll cover, if you can go to the next slide. So we'll cover what is elective pay, and then we'll talk about the current state of elective pay following the passage of HR 1, which is the budget reconciliation legislation, or is also called OBBBA. And then followed by our colleague Minho, who will talk about the Washington Set Cap program that's running only in the state of Washington at this time. And then I'll talk just a little bit about alternative financing options outside of tax credits. And then we'll take questions and answers. We'll do our best to answer questions live as they come through on chat. So, please put your questions in chat. Where some of your questions require more noodling by our colleagues, we'll give them more thought and then get back to you as best as we can. So next slide. So this is a pretty standard disclaimer whenever you hear lawyers talk to you saying that this isn't legal advice. So obviously we will be talking about legal matters, legal issues. It's just that we are not here giving you specific legal advice as your lawyer. So we just want to make that very clear. Again, the key line there on the slide is, please consult your own in-house attorney or your finance officer about your specific projects. Okay, so with that, I'll hand it off to my colleague to start the discussion on elective pay.
Thank you, Edward, and thank you so much, Luke, for having us. My name is Camilla Getz. I'm a clean energy staff attorney here with Lawyers for Good Government. I can't see the participant list, so if folks want to put in the chat their name and their entity, it's really nice to know what sort of entities we're talking to. So feel free to do that, and also feel free if you have questions as I go through this sort of overview, throw those in the chat. Like Edward said, we'll do our best to maybe answer them in chat or take them live. So yeah, with that, let's get started. I'll give sort of a brief overview, very basic, very 101 on what elective pay is. So next slide, please. So what is elective pay? Pursuant to the Inflation Reduction Act, the federal government will give tax-exempt entities tax-free cash funding in the form of a refund. So in the back end, typically 30, but all the way up to 70% of the project cost to build renewable energy projects. So think things like EV charging, electric vehicles, and other clean energy projects. Elective pay is a really exciting opportunity because there's no competition for this money. It's not like a grant. If you are an eligible entity, have an eligible property, and apply, you will get this money. So it's a really great opportunity for the advancement of clean energy projects. Next slide, please. So some of the most common projects that we're seeing entities use under this program that I think will be most relevant to folks on this call are things like solar projects, electric vehicles, electric buses even. There's also ground source heat pumps, energy storage, geothermal. So a lot of different projects that entities might be interested in. And to get a sense of sort of the tax exempt entities that we most commonly work with, things like nonprofits, cities, counties, public school districts, but yeah, lots of nonprofits. Still hoping to see a few entities put what entities they are in the chat. That's great for us to know, but either way, next slide, please. So I went over very briefly, what kind of entities we're looking at, what sort of projects we're looking at, but what is an overview of the actual process to apply for elective pay? So we like to sort of break it down into 3 steps. The first being the pre-filing and registration. So you have your project, it's placed in service, and then after that, you will pre-file your project with the IRS. This entails creating a clean energy account online with the IRS, where you will then register each project and you'll get a unique identification number from the IRS. Once you get that unique identification number, the next step is to file the actual tax forms. That will depend on what sort of credit you're engaged with. That's something that AC and I will be more than happy to sort of get into more details if you have specific questions about the tax forms for the specific projects. And we have lots of resources to help there as well. So the forms will depend on what credit you're applying for. But another really key and important point is the filing deadline. So the credits have to be filed 4.5 months after the end of the taxable year that the project was placed into service. We can answer questions or sort of break that down a little more if there's questions. And there's also a 6-month extension available for folks. So that's something we really like to encourage folks. If you think that deadline might be hard for you to meet, even if you don't think it's going to be hard for meet, might as well apply for that extension. If you apply for it by that original deadline, you will receive the extension. So no harm in having a little wiggle room there. And then the last step, best step, is get that money. Receive the funds from the IRS. The IRS is obligated to pay out, the 30 to 70% of the project cost within 45 days of that tax filing deadline. And, you may have heard sometimes the IRS can be a little slow, but the silver lining there is that the IRS is required to pay a late interest fee on late payments. So if they're late, they will give you a late interest fee. Just a couple key things to keep in mind. AC and I could talk about this overview process for probably hours, so please think of questions that you might have for us. But a couple other things to keep in mind is that the entity claiming the credit has to be the project owner. Generally, there's no partnerships. We can get into some nuances there. And then financing. Remember that this is a back-end credit, and so the entity will receive the funds after the project is placed into service. So Edward's going to kind of touch on green financing and other ways to sort of create that capital stack, but think you have to have your funds up front. And then there's also sort of some restrictions around financing if you're getting your funding from restricted grants. That's something that we can also talk about, but basically the tip of the iceberg is that there's a no excess benefit rule. You're not going to sort of be able to double dip with federal funds. I hope we get some questions on that. And then there's also bonus adders. So there's things that can increase that 30% base all the way up to 70. We usually are seeing more 30 to 40%. But on the flip side, there's also things, requirements that have to be met for you to get that 30%, or it can decrease it. So again, we could talk for a very long time about these bonus adders. So hopefully if there's questions, we'll be more than happy to dive into some more specifics. And with that, I will pass to AC, who is going to give a little more background on HR1 that Edward referenced and sort of what is going on with the current state of these tax credits.
Excellent. Thanks there, Camilla. Next slide. So the current state of elective pay, I know everybody's probably heard that there's a lot been going on with the recent bill that's gone through Congress and signed into law on the 4th. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the changes that's made and where that leaves us right now. So next slide. So HR1 signed into law on the 4th, made a lot of changes to the tax credits themselves, but it did not take away elective pay. So it changed the underlying credits that we can get access to through elective pay, but elective pay itself is unchanged and can still go on there. So ultimately, we're looking at the changes to the credits. And what that really does is it accelerates the phase out of the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. That's under sections 48E for the investment credit and 45Y for the production credit for electrical generation if you're using solar or wind energy. It also imposes some complex new restrictions on prohibited foreign entities, particularly with issues for the tech neutral credits that for projects that begin construction after the end of 2025. So for example, if your project begins construction in 2026, it's going to have to comply with some additionally rather restrictive requirements around dealings with prohibited foreign entities that are going to cause some problems and some difficulties in documentation. And it makes it important to make sure that we're getting things into construction as soon as possible, preferably by the end of this year. It also repeals the 45W clean commercial credit for vehicles acquired after September 30th, 2025. And for purposes of that, acquired means taking delivery of the vehicle. So it's not enough to just have a contract to purchase. You have to physically have the vehicle on or before September 30th of 2025 to be able to claim the credit for it. HR1 also repeals the 30C credit for electric vehicle infrastructure property, so chargers, that sort of thing, for property that's placed in service after June 30th of 2026. So for example, if you have plans to install chargers, get those installed and underway before June 30th, 2026, get those installed before then. It also repeals the 45V clean hydrogen production tax credit for anything that begins construction after 2027. That's got a little bit more of a runway there, but it still accelerates that and makes the end come much sooner than initially had been there in the old law. What it did not do, it did not change the elective pay rules. It did not remove anything around the low-income communities bonus, prevailing wage, apprenticeship, etc. It also didn't make changes to other elective pay credits in nearly the same extent that it did for 45Y, 48E, and the other credits mentioned above. It also does not touch the Section 48 credit for ground source heat pumps. So any of you that are looking to install potentially more efficient ground source heating systems or cooling systems, those ground source heat pump credits still soldier on for anything that begins construction prior to the end of 2034. And again, next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so in practice, complex requirements around prohibited foreign entity rules, those requirements mean you're really going to want to get things under construction if possible before the end of 2025. That's going to help avoid the implementation of some of those additional rules. Anything for wind and solar, if it has not begun construction before July 4th of 2026, it's going to have to be placed in service before the end of 2026, so before 2027 for wind and solar projects. Beginning of construction, the guidance that we have from the IRS currently is there are two ways to do that, and the earlier of those two ways is when a project is considered to begin construction. You either begin physical work of a significant nature, and that's really looking at the nature of the work, not the extent of the work or the value of the work, but it does generally require things like laying foundations that are necessary for the energy property. Building solar racking, for example, is something that would count. But something that does not count are things like just excavation to change the contour of the land, site grading, site prep, getting permits, etc. That's not considered physical work of a significant nature. The other method, one that's more common, is paying or incurring at least 5% of the eligible cost of eligible equipment. That means 5% of the cost of eligible equipment, including costs of labor, etc., to install it. But it also includes any cost overruns. So it's not enough to just hit 5% of your estimated amount. You have to hit 5% of the total cost as evaluated at the end of the project, and not the cost of your estimate. So in practice, what we see most entities doing is using either 10 to 15% of the estimated cost as that amount they're trying to pay or incur to get that 5% safe harbor. And in terms of paying or incurring, if you're cash basis, paying means actually money out the door. Incurring, if you're accrual basis for tax paying or for your accounting systems, that means using having a legal obligation essentially to pay that amount. So incurring that debt for accounting purposes, and your finance or accounting team will know what that means. They'll be able to guide you through making sure that you're doing that. The impact in practice, again, it's essentially a full repeal of the EV and EV charging credits if you don't hit those new accelerated placement and service deadlines. Again, it's not great, but there is still some time to get a good amount of information in and a good amount of projects out the door before it hits. Next slide. So what about in-process filings? What if you filed and you've heard some issues? I know you may have heard from other entities that there's issues with delayed payments, etc. The thing is, even with HR1, even in light of the changes that have been made here, the tax credits remain part of the Internal Revenue Code, and they cannot be denied at the discretion of the IRS. The IRS cannot just say, we're refusing to pay the credits even though they're in law. They have to pay them. And the good news is right now the IRS continues to pay them and continues to work towards that. While there are delays, what we are seeing is these delays are consistent with what we would expect from the staffing issues that the IRS is seeing, and essentially just the issues of not having personnel time to get things through the process as swiftly as they might like to do. And believe it or not, the IRS and Treasury both want to get these refunds processed as fast as they can, because if they take longer than 45 days past the due date of the returns, then they have to pay interest, and they are consistently paying interest on those late returns. So they want to get everything paid quickly because it saves them money and reduces the amount of interest they have to pay. And they are actively working to that as best as they can. Unfortunately, we're dealing with a situation where pretty much every agency of the federal government is having staffing cuts and is generally right now just understaffed and overworked. And that's the reason for these delays that we're seeing. If you have a filing out and you want to check on the status of that, if you've been through the pre-registration tool, there's a secure messaging portal in there that you can use. We have understood off the record conversations with people at the IRS that there are a limited number of employees left to monitor those messaging portal messages. So that may not be the fastest way to get a response, but they are still working on that. There's also the email inquiry through that large elective pay email inbox. Calling the IRS is generally the fastest way to deal with it, to get a person that you can talk to and who might know what's going on. Although there is the official number, that 800 number, in practice, we've generally found that reaching out to the IRS directly to the nonprofit tax-exempt entity division at the 1-877 number listed here on the slide is more consistent in terms of, one, getting in touch with somebody quickly, and also getting in touch with somebody who understands the elective pay filing issues and knows what to look for. If you say, we filed a Form 990T and just want to know the status of that filing. Again, it can be very helpful to tell them which form it is, the Form 990T, and that you're calling to inquire about the status. Next slide. And then this next slide, this is a list of links of resources that can help you out. These are guidance briefs, guidance documents that can talk about it in a little bit more detail, that let you read up on the status of things, as well as provide some step-by-step instructions for working through some of these best practices and establishing things like beginning of construction, as well as our general elective pay resources page. And this will be included in the slides that are distributed after the presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Minho Park to talk about the Washington State SETCAP program a little bit.
Thanks, AC. I'm Minho Park, Project Manager with Lawyers for Good Government, and I manage the Washington SETCAP program. And SETCAP stands for the Clean Energy Tax Credit Assistance Program, which is, we shortened it to SETCAP because that is far easier to say. If you go to the next slide, please. And as you can see here, we are partnered with the Washington State Department of Commerce. They are actually funding this program through the Climate Commitment Act. And we're supported by various partners in terms of actually implementing the program and providing various services, which I will get into later in this part of the presentation. So next slide, just to further contextualize what I'm talking about here. So Camilla did a really great job of sharing information about the elective pay process. AC did a great job of sharing information about how some of those processes and underlying credits have been impacted by recent legislation. And this program is really meant to provide a service. We are here to provide free technical and legal assistance to Washington entities to help you all access these tax credits for clean energy projects, likely to be solar projects with this audience. And yeah, we're just here to provide that upfront service to connect the dots and support you in accessing these credits and actually navigating the landscape. In addition to just the informational pieces that we shared earlier in this presentation. So this program prioritizes tax-exempt entities that can access the elective pay provision. So that includes, CBOs, local government agencies, ports, tribes, and others. But we also do support for-profit entities as well, just on a lower priority basis. This program also prioritizes organizations and entities that exist within overburdened communities in rural areas. So next slide, please. So what are the actual services that we provide through SETCAP? And we've really identified 3 main service tracks. So every entity that we meet with is kind of identified and placed into one of these buckets to receive very specific services through our program. The first bucket that you see on the very left is ready to learn. So this refers to entities that may be unsure if they have an eligible project or may just be seeking more information about elective pay or the underlying tax credits or just this program in general. We have a repository of resources developed by L4GG regarding all of these various topics. So we can connect you with these resources on the tax credits, some of their specific nuances on the elective pay processes and the filing forms. We have webinar recordings. All of these resources are housed in our SETCAP hub, the link to which Stacy just posted in the chat, if y'all can see that. But in case you cannot, we will also share some of these links via email after the fact. So yeah, for those that are ready to learn, we have a lot of resources for you. That's the gist of it. Secondly, we have the service track that is ready to plan. And this refers to folks that are actively planning clean energy projects. And by actively planning, I mean, either ideating or designing or actually even placing into construction a clean energy project. So that's solar, wind, geothermal, or EV purchases or EV charging infrastructure as well. At the very head of this conversation, Edward mentioned that this is not direct legal advice to you, right? But there is actually a pathway for you to receive direct legal advice from us through this program, because for the Ready to Plan folks, we have lawyers that are available to provide free and direct legal technical assistance to you on your specific projects to make sure that you are able to maximize the elective pay potential of your projects. So we would meet with you, chat with you about your projects, and then if we determine that it makes the most sense for you to connect directly with either one of our in-house attorneys or our partner law firms, you can sign a retention letter to actually bring one of us on as your attorney to provide you with direct legal TA on your projects. Like I said, and I'm going to continue to reiterate this, the service is completely free to you, paid for by the state of Washington. So please feel free, just to reach out and take advantage and leverage some of these resources. Finally, we have the ready to file bucket. So this is in reference to entities that have already completed an eligible project. So by completed, I mean placed into service. Your solar system is energized, your electric vehicle is acquired and placed in service for its intended use. If this is the case, then you can receive a free concierge style service to support you throughout the entire filing process. Through SETCAP, we are partnered with Giraffe Financial, and they provide an entire turnkey solution. They have a platform in which you can just enroll, upload some documentation, and they will guide you through the process of pre-registration. They will fill out your tax forms on your behalf. They will file your return for you electronically to the IRS and kind of track the status of your refund as well. The entire service, like I said, completely free, and really meant and designed to make that process as simple and as easy for you as possible. So how do you engage with this program? In order to do so, all you have to do is to fill out our intake form. So this intake form, will take you anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes. You just input some information about your entity, your projects. It'll enter our system, and then we will reach out to you to schedule a screening call, at which point we'll, through that conversation, determine whether you fall into one of these 3 service tracks and figure out the best support that we can connect you with, to get you on your way. So that is the SETCAP program. As that's the gist of the program. Stacy has also included a link to our intake form in the chat. I know we're having some difficulties with the chat, so if you cannot see that link, we'll share all these links with you after the fact, as well, so that you can get connected with our program. Thank you. I think here I will pass it back off to Edward to talk about some upfront financing ideas and options for your projects.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Minho, so much for that. And as Minho mentioned, I just want to clarify about our disclaimer. I think it's an important one to make for this group, that it's just that in terms of the legal disclaimer about this not being legal advice, really just meant this webinar. It should not be construed as legal advice to you and for you, but as Minho said, we do provide legal advice with individual entities. So please feel free to reach out to us to discuss those kinds of opportunities. So just in terms of the financing clean energy, this really is one of my favorite topics. It obviously is a good complement for any good clean energy projects on top of any grants, credits, or other forms of subsidies, but it can also just supplant them entirely, just in terms of how you go about financing your clean energy projects. So how do people do clean? I know that there's been concerns about what HR1 does to solar tax credits and where people go, as tax credits wind down. And I just wanted to just do a quick, revisit the past, just really quickly. And I'm sure this would not come to this group as a surprise, who've been doing solar, before the Inflation Reduction Act came into being. That really people have been doing clean energy projects long before IRA, and led by solar companies, big and small, along with local and state governments, by doing demonstration projects, proof of concept pilots, and we can really just build on those strong foundations. And obviously the fundamental economics of clean energy projects are even so much better than they were 5, 10, 15 years ago. So the first project that I just want to revisit is, this is a project from Arkansas School District. I believe it's back in 2017. What they did is they did a suite of comprehensive energy measures to generate a ton of operational cost savings. And those savings went to increases in teacher salary. So it really is an amazing project. The key enabler of this project is the energy savings performance contract, long-term performance contract, that guarantees cost savings on an annual basis. And obviously what really attracted the private developer to take on projects like this is that their counterparty is a quasi-governmental entity, which is obviously a very highly credit-worthy counterparty, allowing the project developer to get really attractive financing in the market. So this is really how many projects were done before IRA, and I suspect that many projects are being done today using this model, and maybe even more so in the future. Next slide. So again, another example would be, this was the DC government's procurement agency called the Department of General Services that procured power from a wind farm in Pennsylvania. By DC, I just mean the District of Columbia, the local government. And this Department of General Services is responsible for paying the utility bills for all of their government operations. They entered into a 20-year power purchase agreement with a wind power company. And I believe this is more than 10 years ago that they did this. And under this PPA, they were going to receive at least, if not more than, a third of the electricity supply that the entire government needed for all of their operations. Again, what enabled a contract or a project like this was long-term contract with a governmental entity and therefore high credit-worthy counterparty that allows energy companies to obtain attractive financing. And obviously that opens up some negotiation leverages in which the countersigning counterparty can ask to share some of the monetary benefits that the project developers get from low attractive financing interest rates. There are, and I think I really do believe that there probably were dozens of these kinds of examples before IRA passed, and we're going to collect really notable or noteworthy case studies of these kinds of projects to help people figure out how to get market financing to get your projects going. And obviously, what's so promising these days about clean energy is really compared to these to the years when these projects took place, the cost of solar and wind is about anywhere between 70 to 90% cheaper. And especially depending on the specific product types, which is an amazing fact that really favors clean energy deployment, regardless of what the federal policy landscape looks like. And if these local and state entities found ways to do these kinds of projects under those expensive conditions, financial conditions in terms of the material costs, then I have to believe that these projects would be even more achievable now. And it's also true that the tax credits were around back then too, but really the difference is that really the ITCs were really needed back then because of the high cost of solar and wind. And even with that high cost of solar and wind, I remember from my experience of developing solar for all projects for the District of Columbia government, when we were interviewing solar developers, again, small and large, what they really said they needed the most was they really were looking for more long-term contracts with a credit-worthy counterparty to get low interest rate financing. And then second, they talked about it would be really good to have a good net metering policy or a renewable portfolio standard type of market that would recognize the environmental and grid value of the electricity that's generated from solar. And then last were things like grants and credits, sort of essentially one-time injection, capital injection into their projects. But it really was noteworthy even back then that those one-time injection wasn't at the top of mind for solar developers. Lastly, if we can go to the next slide. So I think we really can build on examples like those, and now we have even more tools. Back then we didn't have green banks, now we do. I think that some of these green bank products are starting to roll out. So thus far they may have been a little bit underused. So it may take some nudge and initiative to get them going. And one really promising example is one that I recently saw is a partnership between socially responsible lenders like the Climate First Bank, which is or Climate First Bank, which is just a B Corp bank, with a green bank like the one in Montgomery County, Maryland. And what their arrangement is that the Climate First Bank, they would just come out with a long-term, low interest rate products specifically designed for sustainable energy projects in the residential market. And then the green bank would then buy down the interest rate, so de-risk the investment a little bit more, so that these products can reach lower income households. So that's like one good arrangement, innovative arrangement that these entities are beginning to take, and hopefully some of these types of solutions will be readily available in Washington as well. A little bit different approach was developed in Pennsylvania about 12, 13 years ago. um, where they tried what we call the green bond, which is using the bonding authority in what they call the MUSH sector. That's the municipality, university, schools, and hospital sector, um, that have the authority, that are authorized to issue bonds, to initially fund large retrofits. And the debt payments on those bonds will be made based on annual savings under a guaranteed savings contract, like the Batesville School in Arkansas example that I shared earlier. So there again, there are financial models that are available. There are projects that are happening using these new tools. So I do think that the future outlook for green energy financing is pretty bright, and we really need to best utilize these resources to help fill the gap as the federal government is stepping back with their investments. So I'll stop there. And then hand it over. I believe I'll hand it over to Luke if we want to have the Q&A session.
Yeah, gosh, everybody, I'm so sorry we were having challenges with the chat and the Q&A. We do have a couple of submitted questions, but I think I can turn things on so folks could just ask questions live too. So, do one of you want to answer the submitted questions first?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I know we've seen a couple here from King County, and there are questions about specific dates for solar incentives. When does the project have to be done by? So if the project begins construction on or after July 4th, 2026, then it needs to be completed before the end of 2027. So on or before December 31st, 2027. And that deadline for completion for placement in service does change depending on when the beginning construction date is. So if you can get the project under construction on or before July 3rd, 2026, then the original end dates for the credit would apply. So you'd be able to, as long as it's placed in service by the end of 2032, I believe, would be the deadline for that. One thing to bear in mind there, once construction begins, a project has to make continuous progress towards completion. There has to be continuous construction. So if you start the project before July 4th, 2026, then you need to make sure that you're making continuous progress in order to be able to maintain that beginning of construction date. There is a safe harbor where any project that is placed in service within 4 years of beginning construction is deemed to have had continuous construction. So that kind of effectively makes the easiest thing there. If you place it in construction before July 4th, 2026, and get it into service within 4 years of beginning construction, then you would still be eligible for the credit. If you go beyond that 4-year window, it's still possible. It doesn't automatically kick you out, but the documentation requirements to establish that you've been in continuous construction are extremely onerous. And if you haven't been already maintaining that documentation, trying to gather it after the fact is in a lot of cases just prohibitive in terms of practical person hours and just resources available to do that. So in general, try to get it under construction quickly and try to get it completed within 4 years of placement of beginning of construction if you're aiming to do that pre-July 4th to take advantage of the longer runway. Otherwise, if it's July 4th or later for beginning construction of 2026, it's going to have to be done by the end of 2027. Do we
Thanks,
have anything
AC.
else, Andre?
Yeah, in the meantime, we did have one more question from Krista. She says, I realize this is the webinar about commercial projects, but how are you interpreting the new language of the residential solar tax credit? It went from, quote, placed in service to, quote, expenditures made. How does Lawyers for Good Government interpret this?
I mean, the short answer is we haven't looked at that. I wish I had a better answer for you, but like pretty much any lawyer, I'm very hesitant to give an off-the-cuff answer for something I haven't looked at deeply. Um, yeah, I don't think we have an answer to that, but we can take a look at that and possibly send something out in a bit.
All right. Any other questions in any way that you can submit them? Please. It looks like maybe David has his hand up, actually. Let's see if we can bring him up. Uh, David, are you able to speak?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Go ahead.
Um, so thanks, AC. So am I understanding properly then? So I might have a half dozen solar projects. If I buy material that constitutes 5% or more of what's going to get installed by June 30th of 2026, are you saying that I could then have 4 years to complete those projects?
Oh, you're muted, AC.
In theory, yes, absolutely. As long as you don't, if you are doing 5% of the estimated cost, you want to make sure that you don't have any overruns. So again, in practical consideration, most entities use between 10 and 15% of the cost just to safeguard against project cost overruns, et cetera. Especially when you're looking at longer timeline projects where inflation can play a role in projected future costs. Um, but yes, in general, there is that 4-year assumption. Um, however, I want to actually caution also against stockpiling equipment for projects that aren't well defined yet, because in general, simply stockpiling equipment for unspecified future projects won't be enough to begin construction. You have to have a project facility in mind. So you have to expend costs related to that facility, to that specific project. But yes, if you expend the costs and establish beginning of construction before July 4th, 2026, you would then have 4 years essentially to get those projects into service. Sorry, I see a raised hand.
Oh, and I'd like to throw in there as well that there was an executive order issued on July 7th, and we're waiting for potential like sub-regulatory treasury guidance that may or may not impact the whole sort of safe harbor point that AC was mentioning, potentially increasing that 5% cost. We really don't know. It's a hypothesis at this point, but we put resources in the chat to be able to subscribe to any updates. So that's something as soon as that guidance comes out, if it comes out, we'll do an analysis of that and be sure to update folks on how it potentially impacts the beginning of construction piece.
And based on the deadline that was listed in that executive order, we anticipate that guidance, to the extent that it's going to be able to be in any detail based on the short timeline, to come out before the middle of August, right around the middle of August.
Okay, we've got another question. It looks like from Richard. You want to unmute and ask your question? Did we lose Richard?
Richard, if you're talking, you're muted.
He's still showing on our attendee list and shows unmuted, but yeah, we're not hearing you, Richard. Okay, we'll open it up. Are there any other last questions? Looks like we're getting a few here in the chat, the question function. Michael asks, will L4GG and the new pro bono project be available for nonprofits and states in addition to Washington?
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
think,
let,
yeah, go ahead, AC.
I was gonna say I'm gonna let Edward or Minho take care of that.
Yeah, and so I'll go, but I'll pass it off to Minho. Yeah, we absolutely are looking to provide service to more nonprofits and to more states and to local governments. Um, Minho, the program that Minho's been leading in Washington, SECCAP, we want to use that as a model to replicate in all 50 states and other territories and the Indian tribes. So we're looking for opportunities and we're looking for partners and we have the resources and we are eager to help. Minho?
Yeah, I would say that, as Edward mentioned, Washington's really a leader. The state of Washington's a leader in that space. So, they have really identified and carved out budget within their state budget to be able to provide this sort of service to Washington entities so that you all don't need to pay for this technical assistance. And so we're in conversations with other states. We're trying to emulate this program across the country, but it does require buy-in, right, from these state governments to be able to carve out budgets for this work. But we're really hoping that the successes that we're able to show through our work in Washington State will really encourage other states to follow suit and provide similar services to entities throughout the country. And we're really looking to be a part of that effort. So stay tuned. I would say if you wanted to just like subscribe to L4GG's general updates. That's the best way to be informed of all the programmatic work that we're launching and all the support that we're providing across the country. But thanks for that question.
Yeah, and I'll just
Can we?
mention that we're looking to stand up what we call elective pay sprint hub. We recognize that what HR1 has done is really somewhat complicate and muddle the landscape of tax credit in terms of rules, which rules apply to your projects, which doesn't, what are the dates, as David has been asking us. So we are going to stand up this hub that's really should be open to everybody, all tax exempt entities in the country that can come together where we can help them navigate these kinds of issues to help avoid some pitfalls, help you maximize opportunities, help you prioritize your projects depending on the ease and complexity of the rules that may apply. So, please stay tuned for that. And when you sign up to receive our updates, you'll certainly be notified of when we launch or kick off the elective pay sprint hub.
And thanks, Michael, for the question. I think also Luke is going to put in the chat a resource that I just sent. It's called the Clean Energy Tax Navigator that L4GG has developed. And this is a tool that's not restricted to any state or any sort of entity. And the purpose of the navigator is to be able to use the tool and sort of click through. And as you click through, you'll be connected to resources, educational resources that will help determine whether or not you have project eligibility. Or an eligible project, and you can use that for ideation or actual projects that you may have. And we're currently under the process of updating the navigator to reflect the changes in HR1. It's not currently up to date, so please do note that. But we're working very hard to hopefully turn around an updated tool, hopefully next month, but we'll see.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Camilla. Yeah, that's another really a great resource that we have. It's really a user-friendly tool. As I think I've heard AC describe this tool as sort of like taking an online personality quiz on the BuzzFeed. It's really just a series of yes or no, really simple, and gives you an actionable answer. Having said that, there's one other question that I wanted to address from Michael about foundation-funded efforts in more conservative or red, quote-unquote, red states in lieu of state financial support. And I'm not sure if if I'm interpreting this question correctly. I think we would love to work on essentially a private sector led or philanthropic community led version of SETCAP that covers different states. I think that has really strong possibilities. It may even work better in some instances. And so very much looking forward to those kinds of opportunities. And if you have any details to share on those, we'll be all ears.
Right, I believe we have a hand up from Deborah.
Hello, hi, I'm Deborah Hafner-Ratliff. I'm on the board of Solar Washington. Thank you guys for taking the time to do this. One of the things I have seen with the tax credit is it seems like there might be some sales folks and installers that are using the traditional tax credit in a way it was not intended. For example, like I've seen folks be told like, oh, if you get a roof at the same time you get solar, your roof also qualifies for the 30% federal tax credit kind of thing. And so I'm just curious on the elective pay side, are there any patterns like that emerging or any red flag issues that these organizations might need to be aware of as they go through their solar process?
We haven't seen that to that extent. Certainly the roof is, that's one of the things that we caution against when we're talking with rooftop solar projects is that replacing a roof to the extent that it's being replaced to act as a roof is not an eligible cost, but you can include things like the eligible incremental cost of, for example, installing a white roof instead of a black roof to get the solar reflectivity, especially if you're using bifacial panels. So solar panels that have electrical generation on the bottom and the top, and would use the white roof to bounce solar energy onto the panels. In those cases, the cost difference can be includable in the credit amount, in the credit calculations, but the underlying structural components of the roof would not be. And those are those kinds of things. But we haven't seen quite the same level of, let's call it aggressive salesmanship that we've seen in some of the residential aspects. So that is good, but we do strongly recommend reaching out to entities like Lawyers for Good Government. We've had partnerships with like USDN, other entities. There are lots of nonprofits out there who can give you some baseline information about what the credits actually are and what's actually covered. So absolutely reach out to those entities and those resources. Again, Lawyers for Good Government has a large number of general guidance briefs and documents on our webpage. And look through those, reach out to people experienced in the area. Don't just always trust what salespersons say, because that's sometimes they're simply misinformed or more eager than perhaps they ought to be.
Yeah. And yeah, really, thank you for that question too. It's a timely one. Again, as AC mentioned, we generally don't see it at the level that you may see it in the residential market. But having said that, we are very much on the lookout for bad actors and examples that we want to avoid, make sure that our elective pay communities avoid, because many of these are institutions, and once they have a bad experience, it can really turn them off forever to the concept of clean energy, or just projects that they got a bad taste in the mouth from. So consumer protection is actually on our radar to be working with a bunch of other coalition stakeholders on concerned about those issues, making sure that we're protecting the brand of good clean energy projects as they should be maintained. So as we develop any best practices, some alerts and some practices to be aware of, like questionable practices to be aware of, we'll certainly be happy to share those resources with you.
All right, everybody, thank you so much. I believe we are out of time. So I just wanted to say thank you again to our panelists from Lawyers for Good Government. And please support Solar Washington and watch for our next webinar coming soon.